Welcome to episode 114 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshul Sag. Let's get started with my first topic, and I want to talk about Ericsson and Nokia announcing a collaboration with Google for network slicing. So the immediate question I have is, what does it mean for 5G service delivery on Android devices? So let me provide some background here. The GSMA estimates that the market potential for network slicing is projected at $300 billion, and that's by 2025. And we've talked about network slicing. I mean, this is going to be one tremendous way that operators can really monetize the billions of dollars that they're investing in their 5G buildouts. What this collaboration involves is something called User Equipment Route Selection, or URSP. And it's a feature that enables one device using an Android operating system to connect to multiple network slices simultaneously. And it's a feature that both Ericsson and Nokia plan to support with Android devices. So, it's super compelling. The other thing that I find interesting about this is that it allows operators to use existing network assets, including LTE, and you don't need a 5G standalone core to enable network slicing in this scenario. So I think it's pretty compelling. Obviously, you cover devices, so would love to get your insights on how this might affect things like the Google Pixel platform.
Yeah, so they did this collaboration as a result of testing. So the collaboration is using a Google Pixel 6 Pro. What was the acronym? Is it URSP?
Yes, URSP.
Yeah, so the URSP capability allows for up to 5 network slices at once. This is the first time that network slicing has been shown with multiple slices. So that's already a big improvement,
Right.
Because the reality is network slicing is kind of useless if you only have one slice.
Right.
That's what we have today. But I know that my understanding is that Android 12 already supports network slicing, but it only supports one slice.
Okay.
This new URSP allows for 5 slices. And a lot of the conversation talk that I'm seeing around this network slicing is very enterprise focused.
Right.
And I think this will be a natural progression for things like private 5G and private networks, whereas you start delivering very specific services to end user devices that are enterprise specific. I think some of the examples I've seen were, a network slice specifically for, video calling, where you have a secure line,
Yeah.
and it's actually, its own APN and operating on an entirely different plane. And it delivers a consistent user experience where you get exactly the amount of bandwidth and latency, and packet drops. And this is going to be one of those things where I think network slices are going to be a key component in a lot of SLAs. So I think there's going to be different types of SLAs for different slices, and those will be opportunities for the carriers to monetize their networks in ways that they aren't today.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And what's really interesting, if you think about being able to support up to 5 slices, then an operator can sort of stack the pricing. So for one discrete slice for a certain latency level, they can charge for that. But if they layer on top of that a slice for a guaranteed throughput, or like you mentioned, packet validation, data packet validation, they can get into these pricing stack scenarios. And I agree with you. Where it's really going to shine is within enterprise. So for consumer, one slice is going to do it for things like low latency mobile gaming and cloud gaming and that sort of thing. But I think it's super impressive technology, and we will definitely keep our eyes on this, and as things develop, report back on future podcasts. But let's move to your first topic this week. And there was a big announcement. I was unable to tune in, but you did. I was on a plane flying back from Georgia, but T-Mobile and SpaceX announced some details around a collaboration. You want to provide your insights?
Yeah, so SpaceX and T-Mobile had previously teased that they would be having an event today earlier in the week.
Yeah.
And I surmised that it would likely be related to satellite connectivity for smartphones. And lo and behold, it is. Um, Essentially, this partnership is not really an announcement of any service
Yeah.
or any products at this point, but something that will be available next year, which makes sense because it is dependent on satellites. SpaceX's satellites being able to launch their next gen Starlink V2 satellites that have antennas that can broadcast the signal. The key is that these antennas are larger than the existing antennas on the existing Starlink satellites, so that's why there have to be new satellites.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, those new satellites will be broadcasting on T-Mobile's 1900 megahertz PCS band. From the information that I've been given, there will be approximately 10 megahertz of spectrum for this. I believe it's 5 down, 5 up. So it's not really designed to be a very high capacity adder.
Yeah.
This is really more about coverage and delivering service in places where people just are not used to having service at all on any carrier. And on top of that, I think this will serve as a real added public safety capability because if you fall off your mountain bike and you're riding in the middle of a national park, there's nobody to help you.
Right.
And you've got to help yourself. And the truth is this connectivity will not really initially be used for data. It will primarily be for messaging. And T-Mobile says they're going to work with all of the major messaging services to enable this capability, and then eventually voice, and then hopefully down the road data.
Yeah.
As these network cells get better, because as Elon explained, these satellites are much larger cells, so you have a lot more users per cell.
Yeah.
And each of these, satellite cells are, 2 to 4 megabits per second, which means that you have hundreds or thousands of users on the same line. And, text and voice are much easier to do than data.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, data is a hope down the road. But really what this to me feels like is it's just another evolution of 5G being used to advance, network capabilities and NTN. There was no talk of NTN specifically within 3GPP.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that they may be pushing for this to be a part of that standard, or this to be utilizing that standard, because it sounds like T-Mobile and SpaceX want other carriers to participate. And I feel like 3GPP NTN is the only way to do that. So the weird thing is that T-Mobile says you don't need any new devices to make this work. Your existing devices will be able to take advantage of this. So this might not actually necessarily be a standardized approach, but also T-Mobile tends to be the most standardized carrier of them all.
Right.
So I have a feeling this might just be, maybe a baby step towards NTN.
Right.
But everything that they're saying very much follows most of my expectations of what other carriers will do once they have access to satellites, and deploy this kind of spectrum. Other than that, I think this is just something that will really help T-Mobile be able to potentially claim 100% coverage.
Yeah. No, it fits very well in a T-Mobile strategy, from a coverage standpoint. I did read an article on Mobile World Live after I landed, and it seemed like Elon was sort of soft pedaling the capability. Certainly, he was talking to text coverage and some voice coverage, and then I read something, he stated something like maybe a picture or two. So and there were no, like you mentioned, no concrete plans for a launch. This is just sort of a call it a verbal proof of concept, strategy, whatnot. But T-Mobile isn't the only one that's focused on this. So in SpaceX, so AST Mobile, Space Mobile, we've spoken about them before. They're launching a phone to satellite service and have arrangements with AT&T, Rakuten, and Vodafone.
And then we have OmniSpace, who's doing they are the ones that are explicitly stating that they are going 3GPP NTN as a standard.
Right. We talked about that on a prior podcast as well. But I think this is great. I mean, it's probably a baby step to eventually, adopting a standard and making this ubiquitous. I think it's compelling because I have property in Colorado and I have a satellite device that supports texting, and I use that when I go hiking, and I have to pay a monthly service charge for that. So in the future, to have that capability on my iPhone or my Android device would be pretty compelling. So, but yeah, let's move to my second topic this week, and I want to talk about Huawei. We haven't talked about them in a while, and are they on the run in India? And so it's no surprise that Huawei has been shut out of a lot of the RFQ activity in India. But some recent developments are, there was something called a lookout circular, an LOC, that's been issued against a Huawei telecommunications employee executive, and it's been issued by the Indian Income Tax Department. So, this is, another blow to Huawei. I think that ship had already sailed in India, but this doesn't look very good for Huawei, just, on the global stage, even with respect to the continued business that they're doing with Chinese operators. But I don't know if you caught any of this news, but what do you think about all that?
I mean, India and China have a very complicated relationship lately,
Yeah,
and I think India is more than happy to push out a Chinese vendor if it means that there's potential for Indian vendors to do well.
yeah,
So I think at this point, Huawei is not really much of a factor on infrastructure or on devices in India.
yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, to my knowledge, there aren't a lot of Indian, infrastructure, providers. What, like the Reliances of the world are doing, they're leaning heavily into software defined and cloud native and common off the shelf servers, utilizing Open RAN and vRAN to, kind of improve their agility and lower their capex and their opex. But yeah, I think, it was already a foregone conclusion, but again, just not a good, not great optics for Huawei on that front. But let's move to your second topic this week, and you want to talk about North America smartphone shipments.
Yeah, so North America smartphone shipments basically down 6%. This is based on a Canalys report, and they basically said that smartphone was already kind of a single digits in Q1 and Q4, and it passed the negative territory in terms of shrinkage. But units are still pretty stable in the low to mid 30s, but growth did kind of fall off. So we're kind of in a stagnant scenario, I would say, right now. And honestly, we've kind of been in the 30 to 40 million range for a while now, with a few peaks and valleys. So I don't really expect smartphone numbers to really drop dramatically more. That said, things happen, and there's a lot of economic uncertainty still. So I think that this will be a continued story to watch to see what North America smartphone numbers are like. But that said, they also talked about what are the top shipping, smartphones in the North American market, and basically it's 9 Samsung and Apple devices and 1 Motorola device. So it's like the iPhone 13, iPhone SE, iPhone 13 Pro Max, iPhone 13, iPhone 12, S22 Ultra, Moto G Power, Galaxy A13, iPhone 13 Mini, S20, Galaxy S20. So those are the top 10 devices. And yeah, it's a difficult market to be in, but I think when you look at overall shipments, Apple is shipping about 18 million devices. Samsung's shipping about 9. Motorola's got 3. TCL is 1.8. Google is not even at 1 million.
Right.
Uh, and yeah, it's, market share numbers are pretty lopsided. Apple's got 48% market share. Samsung's got 23%. Motorola's got 8. TCL's got 5, and Google's got 1. So,
Hmm.
it's a pretty lopsided market, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these articles coming out about Apple and iMessage and blue bubbles and green bubbles. So
Yeah.
overall, I think the U.S. smartphone market isn't really going to change drastically one way or the other. But I think that the overall market has kind of become a little stagnant once again.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned inflationary pressures, and this might be, people pumping the brakes on phone upgrades and that sort of thing. Apple does have an announcement coming up, right, in early September, and that's typically, September is sort of the time of the year when we see, new phones, right, launch from both Apple and Samsung.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so I think we'll see a bounce back there. Another thing to note, I saw recent shipments on PCs, and they're way off. They're much more off than the 6%, drop that you spoke
yeah.
to in Q2 for smartphones. So, I think consumer devices in general, people are probably pumping the brakes temporarily, but it should recover, I think, as we get to the latter part of the year. But let me move to my third and final topic this week, and I want to talk about Rakuten Mobile. They announced an open vRAN lab in Japan, and so my immediate thought was, what's the impact? So it's a joint R&D activity with Tokyo Institute of Technology and the University of Tokyo. And Rakuten is saying that its virtualized Open RAN vRAN verification platform is now available to operators, vendors, and other enterprises. And the lab is sort of designed to promote, disaggregated architecture in general and containerization in the cloud native functionality, and the leverage of, as I mentioned earlier, common off the shelf servers to provide improvements in capex and opex, and so I think this just sort of continues to solidify Rakuten's journey in what they're doing with their greenfield deployments with LTE and now 5G, to try to drive a lot of cost out of it. But as we know, this is not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of integration involved, and Rakuten has stumbled in the past. But what are your thoughts?
I think this is a natural progression
Yeah.
of Rakuten wanting to, um, expand its capabilities and its relationships. In general, I find labs to be a place that are or a place that is designed to enable companies to work together more easily.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately that's what's needed for something like vRAN, and especially a company like Rakuten that's still trying to grow um, its footprint both within Japan and globally. So
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing, but I also don't think it's really much outside the ordinary.
Yeah, no, I agree too. I think again, it just sort of solidifies the journey that they're on. So, but let's move to your third and final topic this week. You want to talk about AT&T and T and their announcement around supporting a number of devices for their mid-band 5G deployment.
Yeah. So when AT&T announced its 5G deployment, there was some conservative estimates around how many devices they would be able to support, both with C band and the 3.45 gigahertz band. As they said that all devices will have C band, but some might not have 3.45.
Okay.
But now it seems like AT&T is um, kind of backpedaling on that conservatism in a good way,
Yeah.
by saying that they will support 30 devices with both C band and 3.45, which means that users will have a lot more access to a lot more spectrum. And some of the devices go as far back as the iPhone 12. So
Oh,
it's not even current generation devices; it's also last generation devices, which
yeah.
I think is great for people who already own these devices. But it's also great for people who might, be trying to get a cheaper device, but still want to have access to, the newest capabilities and the fastest network. That said, I think there's something to consider that, performance on these older devices will very likely not be as good
Yeah.
as it would be on a newer device. Like I'd say an iPhone 14 will very likely have a more up-to-date RF front end, better transceiver, better antennas,
Yeah. Yeah.
better modem, and better power management, and it'll probably get better performance at lower power than say an iPhone 12. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important that a lot of people understand that when you don't get the best device that's available on market, you probably are also not getting the best coverage and speeds.
Yeah.
And it's probably not the operator's fault. I've actually been running into this a lot with some users who, went around the country saying, T-Mobile's 5G is awful,
Right.
and then they actually only have, an iPhone 12 or they have an iPhone 11. I'm like, you can't even get 5G.
No.
So I really do think it's important for operators to educate their customers on the the differences between devices. But
Yeah.
then there's this whole relationship with OEMs, and an OEM that ships a $300 device doesn't want to be seen as inferior to a $1,000 device, even though it is in almost every imaginable way.
Right. Yeah. Well, you get what you pay for, right? Yeah. And I, you're quite active on social media like I am. And, I saw one of your posts about, your experience with T-Mobile, and I saw, you know, all of the replies, some positive, some not so positive. You're absolutely right. It depends on the device you have and the capability of that device and the age of that device. So, but anyway, buddy, it was another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone would like to reach out to us to provide insights on a future 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will's at Will Tech, and I'm at Anshel Saad. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.